Hello everyone. I'm very happy to have you back on my channel. In today's story, everything does not begin with anything too different. Not a major turning point. Not an unexpected event. But instead, it starts from the most familiar things. The routines repeated every single day. The rhythms of life that seem to have settled. Moments that, to anyone looking from the outside, would appear completely normal. But only those within can truly understand that beneath that calm surface are thoughts never spoken, pressures never shared, and conflicts quietly building up, little by little, waiting for the moment when they can no longer be held back. One morning, not too early, not too late, Hoai Ca and Hùng returned to the land where they had once poured so much time and effort. A place where they had placed so much hope. A place filled with plans, intentions, and dreams. Yet, after being away for some time, everything had changed. Wild grass had grown thick, covering the old paths. The areas that were once neatly cleared had now turned rough and overgrown, as if no human hand had ever touched them. That space felt familiar, because it was once where they belonged. But at the same time unfamiliar, because nothing was the same anymore. Standing in the middle of that land, neither of them spoke. Just a brief silence, but enough for both to understand that the road ahead would not be easy. Then, the work began. No reminders. No need for instructions. Each person simply took on their part. Hùng held a machete, each swing firm and decisive, clearing the land that had been swallowed by weeds. Hoai Ca used a hoe, digging up the remaining cassava roots. Each strike heavy, but steady. No rush. No haste. Just working. Working as a way to keep moving forward. To not stop. To not give up. The sounds of labor were not loud, but echoed clearly in the quiet space. The blade cutting through dry grass. The hoe striking hardened soil. Blending together. Creating a rhythm. Slow, but certain. Every action was not just work, but effort. Persistence. A way for both of them to remind themselves that no matter how difficult things were, they still had to continue. Hoai Ca wasn't working randomly. She had thought this through carefully. Step by step. Choice by choice. This year, she didn't want to plant as much cassava as before, because she understood that spreading their efforts too thin would only reduce effectiveness. Instead, she chose a different direction. More practical. More suitable. She planned to use this land to grow corn. A crop not only easier to manage, but also something they could directly use as feed for the chickens. Reducing costs. Reducing effort. And more importantly, making everything more stable. It wasn't an impulsive decision, but the result of many thoughts, many considerations, between what she wanted and what she could actually do. Hùng listened to Hoai Ca. He didn't object, didn't argue. He simply nodded gently, as a sign of agreement, as a way of showing that he trusted her decision. But in his eyes, there wasn't complete reassurance. There was still a hint of hesitation, a hint of concern, because he understood starting over had never been easy, especially when what they once had was no longer intact. Everything now had to be rebuilt from the beginning, little by little, step by step, with no guarantees, no certainty, Only belief. And effort. Under the increasingly harsh sunlight, the air became heavy, stifling. Sweat soaked through their clothes, dripping down. But neither of them stopped. Only their pace slowed slightly. Their breathing grew heavier, and their bodies began to speak. After constant effort, Hung kept going, as if trying to do just a little more, push just a little further. But it was that very effort that made Hoai Ca realize he was getting tired. Not just a passing fatigue, but a sign that his body was reaching its limit. She didn't speak immediately. She just observed, watching how he paused longer after each swing, watching how his breathing deepened, watching how his hands began to slow down. Then she gently spoke. Not a request, not a command, just a reminder. Soft, but enough for him to understand. She told him to rest for a bit. Not because he was weak, not because he couldn't continue, but because she understood clearly that there are limits, and if you push beyond them, the cost to pay would not just be exhaustion, but consequences no one would want. And sometimes, knowing when to stop is exactly the way to be able to go further. But while the two of them were still immersed in their own lives, still taking things step by step, rebuilding with their own hands what had once been left unfinished, still trying to hold on to stability amid difficulties that had never truly disappeared, somewhere else, a completely different story was quietly unfolding. Not loud, with no obvious signs, but carrying movements that could change everything. Hoai Ca's foster mother, after a very long time, living far away, in a place where everything was likely different, a different way of thinking, a different perspective, a different way of handling things, suddenly returned. Without notice, without preparation, just a decision, yet carrying with it so many things that no one could see at first. She came back, not only with luggage, but also with her thoughts, her concerns, her expectations, and even the things that had never been spoken all this time. Things that had been kept inside, hidden away. And now, upon returning, everything seemed to want to surface, to be addressed, to be resolved, to be said again, in the way she believed was right. She came to the house, the place she believed her daughter was living, a place that, in her mind, should have been better, more stable, at the very least, a place that could bring peace of mind to a mother who had been away from her child for such a long time. But when she arrived, when she stood before that space, when she saw everything with her own eyes, reality was not what she had imagined. It wasn't as spacious as she had hoped. It wasn't fully equipped. It wasn't the life she had pictured. In her thoughts, everything still showed signs of hardship, still carried traces of struggle, still held things that made it impossible for her to feel at ease. And then, the meeting between her and Hung's mother took place without any prior arrangement, without anyone setting it up. Simply two people meeting in the same space, yet carrying two completely different perspectives. At first, everything remained normal. Polite inquiries, simple greetings, social exchanges, enough to keep the atmosphere from becoming tense right away. But as the conversation went on, as more was said, The different girl holding on to the calm from the beginning. The sentences were no longer measured, no longer held back, but began to be spoken directly, frankly, and filled with more emotion than ever. Hoai Ca's foster mother could no longer hide her frustration. She believed that she had changed, had tried, had learned to step back, was no longer the same as before, no longer holding on to rigid thoughts, no longer placing her ego too high, but had learned to listen, learned to reflect on what had happened in the past. To her, this return was not simply coming back, but a choice, a decision to fix things, to start again, to bring something better for her daughter and for the relationships that had once been broken. But on the other side, Hung's mother did not see things that way. She did not rush to argue back, but every word she spoke was clear, firm, and without avoidance. What she saw was not a change from within, not something that came from sincerity, but only what was shown on the outside, what could be seen, but not necessarily the true nature. Because if it were truly a change, then it wouldn't be just words, not just an attitude at a single moment, but consistency, clear expression, in behavior, in actions, in real situations. And to her, those things were still not enough. Cracks, once they appear, are not easily erased. No matter how much time passes, no matter how things change, what has happened will always leave a mark. Somewhere, in thoughts, in emotions, and in the way people see each other. It's not impossible to mend, but it cannot be erased with just a few words. Because of that, when their viewpoints were laid out, it was no longer a gentle exchange, but gradually became confrontation. No one stepped back. No one wanted to give in. Not out of stubbornness, but because each believed they were right. They were protecting what needed to be protected. They were standing on the side they believed was justified. The tension did not explode immediately, but simmered, rising slowly, little by little, like a rope being pulled tight, with no stopping point. Voices began to rise, no longer controlled as before. The words lost their softness, becoming direct, clear, and filled with stronger emotions. It was no longer a conversation, no longer an exchange of views, but had turned into an argument. Fierce, relentless, with no pause, no real listening, just words overlapping, stacking on top of each other, pushing the atmosphere to a level of tension that was hard to control. At that very moment, outside, a neighbor noticed something was wrong. Without needing to understand the whole story, just hearing the voices, just sensing the atmosphere, was enough to know things had gone too far. That person hurried, ran over to find Hoai Ca, without hesitation, without delay, quickly making a call, their voice urgent. No time to explain, only enough to say one short sentence, but enough for the listener to understand the seriousness. Come quickly, something's wrong. On the other side, Hoai Ca and Hung, hearing those words, didn't need to ask more, didn't need to think twice. Just the tone, just the urgency, was enough to feel something was not right. Something That could not wait. Both of them almost immediately stopped, leaving their unfinished work behind. No time to pack up. No time to prepare. Just hurriedly rushing back. Their steps quick, faster than usual. No one spoke, but both understood. An uneasy feeling was forming in their minds, in their emotions, and in their heartbeat, beating faster with every second. Not from exhaustion, but from worry. Worry about what was happening. Worry about what they had yet to know. The road back was not long, but in that moment, it felt stretched out. Every step carried anticipation, tension, and unease. When they arrived, the scene before their eyes appeared. No need for explanation. No need for words. It was enough to make both of them stop, freeze. For a brief moment, the two mothers stood facing each other, not far apart. Yet it felt like an invisible wall separated them. No one stepped back. No one avoided. They simply stood there, looking straight at each other, holding firmly to their own stance. The atmosphere was no longer just tense, but heavy, pressing down on every feeling, every thought, like a rope pulled to its absolute limit, just waiting for a small push to snap. Hoai Ca panicked, no longer able to remain as calm as before. She barely had time to think, reacting purely on instinct, quickly running toward them. The distance between her and the two mothers was not far, yet it made her feel as if she were running through a heavy atmosphere, filled with pressure, filled with things she couldn't even name. She reached out her hand, trying to stop them, not with force, but with worry, with panic, with a single desire for everything to stop before it went too far. On the other side, Hùng was no slower. He rushed in, without hesitation, without calculation, simply reacting. When he saw things slipping out of control, he stood between them, keeping distance, trying to separate the two mothers, not letting their words, not letting their emotions continue to collide directly. But even though both of them tried, even though they stood in between, even though they spoke up, even though they used every bit of calm they had left, everything seemed to have gone beyond the point where it could easily be stopped. Words were no longer thought through before being spoken, no longer measured, no longer controlled, but instead poured out, continuously, relentlessly, carrying emotions that had been held back for too long, things that had never been said in the past, thoughts that had once been ignored, wounds that had been buried. All of it, in that moment, was no longer held back, no longer suppressed, but erupted, powerfully, uncontrollably, between two generations. It was not just a difference in age, but a difference in perspective, in thinking, in choices. On one side were past experiences, lessons learned, beliefs formed over time. On the other side was the present, the choices being made now, the paths they were walking themselves. And when those two sides could not meet, could not find common ground, the distance would only grow wider. Not just a gap in words, but a gap in thoughts, in emotions, and in understanding one another. Amid things that had never been resolved.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Nay thì mình đang làm video về câu chuyện của Hoài Ca và Hùng nha mọi người. Thì hôm nay mình chia sẻ cái câu chuyện này vì ở trong đây có một nội dung khá là hay là hôm nay ở trong tập hôm nay thì mẹ nuôi và mẹ ruột của Hùng, mẹ nuôi của Hoài Ca và mẹ ruột của Hùng xảy ra xích mích với nhau, thì việc đó đã dẫn đến điều là Hoài Ca và Hùng nhanh chóng chạy đến. Tuy nhiên thì cũng không có ổn lắm, bởi vì Hùng và Hoài Ca đã gặp phải những mâu thuẫn trong lúc hai mẹ đang tranh cãi với nhau. Vậy thì liệu chuyện này sẽ được giải quyết ra sao và liệu mâu thuẫn của hai mẹ có được xử lý không? Thì mời mọi người đón xem tiếp theo vào tập sau nhé. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo.